Are those trade secrets?
All right, everybody, we have Andrew Cadima here with us, and he's going to go ahead and start his demo.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Hey, thanks for everybody coming out. Yeah, so today I kind of, typical me, I have zero plan for what I'm going to do. But that's I feel like that's the most realistic representation of how I paint. So I'm just going to take a photo of myself real quick. And we're going to paint that. And it's going to be really loose. When I paint a portrait and I'm not really too curious or too worried about who it is that I'm painting, like the subject matter is not the focus of it, I kind of get rid of the worry that I need to make it look exactly like that person. So I'm just working to make an expressive face and not worry too much about that it looks like me or anything. So usually when I start with the darkest colors, or at least like the dark shapes in the face that I can see pretty easily right away. And to get that color right now, I'm just mixing cadmium red light and ultramarine blue. And that gives me kind of a dark, muted purple. That's really great for skin shadows. And it's a great place to start if you're not even sure of what color something should be. It's a great starting point for any shadow on the face. It's really easy to sort of mix with and everything. I guess I should go over my palette first. This is titanium white, cadmium yellow light, cadmium red light. We're going to skip all this extra stuff here. Ultramarine blue and ivory black. And those are the only colors that I'll be using for this particular painting. All right, so.
And then do you want people to ask questions?
Yeah, please. Oh, anybody ask questions, go for it. Yeah, totally. I'll ramble like a psycho if you don't ask questions, so please do. Right. So I think the place that I usually start with, just because a lot of times I get asked how do you deal with centering the image on the canvas? And the best way is to kind of pick a point that is going to be the focal point of the whole portrait, and it's usually the eyes. So that'll be around the middle area here, and also hopefully in the middle vertically as well. So I'm just going to target the inside of each eye. There's a shadow that kind of falls right there. And that'll be right where the brow is kind of pushing over towards the nose. And also to deal with symmetry, it's a great idea to just kind of work both sides at the same time. So when I do one thing on one side, I'm going to kind of mirror what it looks like on the other side. And being very free with it, not worrying too much about getting a specific shape, just because you're going to go over it so many times. The likelihood that you're even going to see any of this in the final painting is very low. So just a way to get started. So that's the inside of the eye right there. And then the brow will kind of pull over. Kind of have a real expressive brow here. Something similar on the other side. And I should mention that right now in the early stages of the painting, just because I want the paint to flow kind of pretty easily, and I want to be able to drag a lot of it across, or drag a little bit of paint across a larger space, I mix with mineral spirits just to loosen the paint up a little bit. Oops. All right. I'm going to start working on the actual eye itself, and I'm going to start here in the middle, just where we would understand the tear duct to be. And there are plenty of systems that you can go by to sort of understand the proportions of the face, just generally speaking. And typically with the eyes, you could think of it separated into thirds, like there's an eye space between the two eyes. So I kind of have that in my mind a little bit, but really I'm just following, my own perception of what it looks like, trusting that my eyes see the right thing, and then just trying to paint exactly what it is that I see.
Do you usually use references from your phone or from photos?
Usually my phone, which is actually not a great thing because it kind of messes you up and trips you out when the light is shining through it, and getting a color match is sometimes a little bit more difficult that way. So if I was like, really worried about getting it super, super accurate and making it look exactly like the photo, I would print it first, for sure. But, like I said in the beginning, most of the time, it's stressful to worry about making it look like the person. And if it's just like a personal piece that, it's not like a commission or something like that, I'm not going to worry too much about it, and phone is more than enough. So because the light source is from above, the shadow is kind of falling over. So every surface that's pointing towards the ground or parallel to the ground is going to create a shadow plane. So for instance, the outline of the tops of the eyes. And then the pupils, centering the pupils is also sort of a weird thing, difficult thing sometimes, just because our tendency is to want to make it really, really, really symmetrical and put each iris in exactly the same place on both sides, but that ends up making us look a little bit cross-eyed, just the nature of the way we look at things.
We have a couple questions from Zoom.
Yeah.
If you don't use yourself for reference, where do you find your reference? Do you generally take pictures of people you know?
Sometimes. Yeah, it really depends, I would say most of the time if I'm painting a portrait of somebody, it's specifically because of that person. But if it's just like, I just generally need some person, something, I can use myself and kind of change the way I look a little bit. It's just really getting a loose reference of how I want shadows to work or light to work.
Kate Zambrano wants to know what surface you're painting on.
Hey, Kate. It's the Trekell ACM oil ground panel, which is actually super, super, I love it a lot, especially with smaller paintings like this. It's so great because the finish is really, really smooth, and you can get a lot of fine detail without worrying about the weave or anything interrupting you.
Did you treat the surface with anything?
No, this is how it comes. So it's already primed with oil ground, and it's just ready to go. All right, so the next shadow part that I'm going to move on to is the nose, and maybe just a little bit warmer. I should also mention this is 90 minutes, so I got to kind of speed racer through this thing. And if I was doing it normally on my own time, I may be a little bit more conscious about all these shadow shapes being slightly different temperatures. But it works this way too. And again, finding out where this goes, it's sort of difficult for me to kind of say exactly what I'm doing because I really do it just by trusting my eye and being intuitive about it. And this is just where the shadow is casting over the nose.
Gary Cadima wants to know, do you prefer to paint with a single brush? If so, what size is your favorite and brush type?
Hi, Gary. What's up? Gary's my brother. Honestly, I will probably paint this whole thing with one brush, mostly out of laziness, but it's such a small painting, and it's this is such a perfect brush for it, so you don't really need to. I remember there's a quote from Bob Ross that I always thought was so funny, where he would say he believes that you could paint the Mona Lisa with a 2-inch brush if you worked hard at it. And it's an absurd example, but there's something to that where manipulating the brush or getting really comfortable with the brush is something I really like. So there's certain painters who will be like so specific about each stroke being exactly the width of the brush and being very technical with it. But I do lots of, moving around and painting with different angles of the brush and everything.
So what size is that?
This is a size 2 flat golden Taklon brush from Trekell. And I like the flats because, well, they give you really nice sort of broad strokes if you want them. And then you can get really sort of specific, tight, thin lines as well. Here we go. So generally we can kind of see everything's kind of shaping up to look kind of like a face at least. And the next part that we're going to worry about is the lips. And the top lip, because it's sort of facing more parallel with the ground, is going to be the darker one. And the bottom lip, which is facing up towards the light source, is going to be brighter. So I'm just going to sort of gesture in where that top lip would be. Going back to references, by the way, a question about where do you get your references? That was a big issue for me starting out, just because I was in my apartment by myself. I mean, in my room by myself. Not really thinking about, or not really knowing anybody who would be up for, modeling or anything like that for me, or sitting. Especially when you're just starting out, it's such a stressful thing to like have somebody sit there, and then, there's this sort of thought that you're going to create something good, and it's going to be bad in the beginning, right? So it's sort of stressful to have somebody else sit there for you. But there's great resources out there. If you look online, I can think of one that comes to mind, which is on Instagram actually, called Canyo, which is just like a sort of a coalition of artists basically, and they have this public Telegram channel where everybody just shares references of themselves, and they're all copyright free, and like, you're allowed to kind of use them in any way that you want to. Canyo, yeah. Actually, honestly, I think it's a public Telegram channel, so you should be able to find it, but I'm really not sure. I know they have a Instagram profile though. Like Canyo. CANE-YO. I hope they're cool with me shouting them out. There we go. We can kind of put the bottom of the chin as well. All right, so that's like what I would consider my sketch, basically. And it just sort of outlines everything that I need to know about the face before I start putting in a lot of color. And like I said, I kind of work, generally most dark to light. This is not the darkest color that I'll use, but certainly the darkest shapes.
Sorry to say this before, but
Yeah.
Is that Camsol in your?
It actually is, yeah. So sometimes I use terpenoid, just whatever. I think chemically they're pretty much the same, just mineral spirits, odorless mineral spirits. Yeah, and I think, generally if it works as a solvent, it's going to work in this case as well. But stuff like turpentine, so much more harmful to your health and offensive to your nose.
We have another question from Zoom.
Yeah.
When you first started oil painting, how long would it take you to complete one?
Oh, that's pretty interesting. I think like it's hard for me to remember the very, very beginning, but now it's like I feel like I've slowed down a lot. Like there was a year or two ago where I felt blazing fast. And now I feel like I'm going much, much slower. And I don't know what the reason is. I think maybe it's because I watch TV shows while I paint now, and I'm like so distracted. But now I'd say, a painting like this, 90 minutes to 2 hours is probably pretty average. But I can, of course, spend, 3 hours, 5 hours, 7 hours on a painting. It just depends on the specific painting. All right, now I'm going to start to work on sort of imagining that, if I was pouring liquid over my face and imagining that liquid is light, where is the liquid last to land and then move up from where it's first going to land. So I'm going to start just outlining these shadow shapes almost. And this is just a slightly warmer version of that same color. So just adding a little bit more cadmium red in there, maybe a tiny bit of cad yellow as well. And when painting the face, it's pretty interesting as compared to other subjects because, not only are you thinking about where the light lands, but you're also thinking about, what's going on underneath the skin. How close is the bone to the skin? How much blood might there be in a particular place? Like stuff like earlobes and ears, you might paint them a lot warmer just because you know that there's a lot more blood. It's a lot more flush. Noses as well. And also, it's pretty interesting, I think, like a lot of people have this thought that value is like, that's how you get your sort of shape, and that's how you get your depth. So like, the darker the value is, the more recessed it's going to be. And that is true, of course, but there's also so many other things. I feel like there's three main things that really give you shape in a painting, and that's value, of course, but also temperature can really pull an object out. Like this nose, for instance, is going to end up being so warm compared to the surrounding area of the face, and it's really going to help to bring it forward. And then also, I think texture is another thing that really helps create shape. So these shadow shapes are going to remain pretty translucent as they are, having been mixed with the solvent. And then most of the highlights are going to be really, really thick paint, just straight out of the tube.
Leandro says you make it look so easy.
Oh, thank you. It is easy. I'm going to kind of switch over to another part. This is always so interesting, like the dance of kind of moving around the canvas, and just what your eye sees is always a little bit different for me. I think, there are artists out there who are very programmatic about the way they approach certain subjects, and they'll do the same steps in the same order every time. But for me, it's like, something will catch my eye and I'll just have to kind of move on to that. So right now I'm really thinking about, just for no reason, the cheek, which is going to help also bring out the sort of general shape of the face. And the cheek is probably because it's a little bit turned away from the light and it's recessing into the back. It's going to be a cooler color, so I'm going to mix it with a lot more ultramarine blue. But the value is not so much darker, so I'm also going to put in a lot of white there. And when you're mixing, it's also important to remember that if you're mixing with white, white tends to be a cooling color as well, so that will also aid in the cooling of your mixtures just by virtue of having the white there.
So you never pre-mix colors, you just like...
No, I can't do that. I tried like a couple times in like bigger portraits, but I find that such an extra step for me. And if I'm going to do something, I need as little steps as possible. And right now I'm kind of curious about where this is going to land, just as like sort of the general composition of the whole thing. I don't know that I'm going to finish the face, so I'm hesitant to kind of put in any kind of super finished outlines.
We have another question. Do you ever mix with an oil? If not, is that because you generally paint one sitting?
Sometimes I do use oil. I actually don't have any with me, so won't be using any today. But yeah, and it really, honestly, it depends on the paint that you use. If you use like a very smooth paint that's got a pretty high oil content already, there's really not a lot of necessity to add any oil into it. Of course, yeah, if you do it in multiple sittings though, and you need to like re-wet it, like oil out the canvas before you start another layer or something like that, I would use it, but those are pretty rare. Yeah, I usually paint most things in one sitting. Great piece of advice that I kind of don't follow so much anymore in my typical work, but I remember being really helpful for me when I was just starting out, was get as much onto the canvas as you can as quickly as possible. And that way, the human eye is so much better at judging things that are already there than trying to pick things out of nothingness. So if I have something there, even if it's wrong, it kind of still informs me what the right answer might be. So it's a little bit better than kind of being very, very, very detailed and specific and trying to work things out perfectly the first time. So just being real general and expressive in the beginning can be super helpful.
You like working with the white of the canvas and not toning it down a little bit?
Yeah, that's so funny. We were just talking about that. Yeah, I used to do that for sure. And I actually kind of liked the feeling because it would be a big wash of like solvent and like a little bit of paint in it. And I kind of liked the feeling of painting into that solvent when it was still like just a touch moist still, a little bit wet. Yeah, that was my style back then. But now I just paint with the white. It's really about the preparation of it. I'm so against like being, and not in general, not for other people, but for me personally. Oh, I just hit the mic. I hope that wasn't awful. I'm so against like preparing so much before I start painting. That's why I don't, do a very detailed sketch or anything and then paint into that. Just because I end up feeling like it affects your painting in so many ways that you don't want to. I mean, aside from the toning, like drawing, for instance, I found myself ending up really trying to preserve the drawing more than I was interested in creating a beautiful painting. So that kind of led me away from that. And, toning the canvas, just again, like, I felt it unnecessary, so why do it? I think people do that a lot because, it helps you judge values a little bit easier, maybe, because you're not sort of comparing everything to really stark white. But you can see the white fine if you have the experience with it. And I don't know, can you see this? Yeah, for sure. So my palette is actually, I purposely put a really white backing underneath the palette, just so I know the color that I'm mixing here is going to be represented similarly on the panel that's white. So oftentimes you'll see artists with like a gray panel or something that's like a mid-tone, so they can judge values a little bit easier. But for me, I like to see the way that the color is going to be represented. Well, I know those people.
Huh?
I know those people. You can let them.
You?
Yeah. If there's like a rule, if there's a rule of not letting them in.
You can kick them out of PDS too.
They're hecklers. They're coming to heckle.
Is that what they came here for?
Yeah.
How have you come to land on the palette of colors that you've got now? Is that over some long period of sort of trial and error?
Yeah, it was like, I think I used to, I don't know, a lot of my things, I relate a lot of my experience. So my background is actually in music, and that's what I went to school for. And I went to school for composition, for writing music. And I remember like one of the things about being like a young composer, you were so interested in making like the biggest, sort of most impressive statement always. And you would like write these huge, complex orchestral pieces. And then as you gain more experience, you felt less is more, and you felt like you needed less to say what you want to say. And I remember, I relate that a lot to painting, because I remember in the beginning it was very similar, where not only did I want to paint these very dramatic subject matters, but I also had like this very complex palette of like tons of colors, and I thought it was necessary. But yeah, eventually just kind of weeded them out slowly. I took care of all of the earth tone colors. That was like the biggest purge that I made. And I just didn't like the way that they looked. I felt like they were all, even if you would get an accurate color, it was sort of dampening. They were not very vibrant colors. So I felt like they were, I don't know, well, just killing the vibrancy sometimes. So I got rid of all of those. And that left me pretty much with just the primaries. And, I thought to myself, well, my printer takes 3 colors of ink and it does a pretty good job of representing things. So I thought I could do the same thing. So it's actually kind of funny. Whenever I mix a color, or whenever I get asked a question of like, what color am I mixing? Or, what paints am I using? It's difficult for me to answer because it's almost always the same colors, just like different ratios.
So for
Hey,
instance,
guys.
right now,
Yeah.
your white, yellow, red, what are you pulling off on the darker side?
Sorry.
What are you reaching for on the darker side of the palette?
This right here, always blue.
Blue?
Yeah, just the blue. Yeah, so this cheek, everything on this side generally, everything that's sort of receding away is going to end up being a little bit cooler. Even in the eyelids. All right, now kind of pulling more to more forward-facing planes. So adding a little bit of the warmer colors, the red and the yellow. Also, this is something that I've been doing recently, where I used to be very particular about mixing these very specific piles, and now I've kind of gotten into this habit of just remixing everything every time I need it. One of my teachers in composition used to tell me, if you're writing something and you would, just kind of throw a big repeat in a particular passage, he was like, do you really want to say the same thing the exact same way twice in a row? And I think about that with colors too, like, having that variety of having to remix the colors is pretty interesting sometimes. How dark does this look over there? Oh man, can you even see it? All right. This is another thing. When you mix something, you might see me kind of do like one stroke and then kind of pull back. It's really just sort of judging whether I need to adjust that mixture. Also with the eyes, I'm kind of imagining a little bit about what's going on underneath and imagining the eyes, sort of the sphere. And as it gets to the part that's most close to me, I'm trying to pull that out with a little bit lighter of a value. All right, what I was talking before about temperature being a great way to kind of pull shapes out. I'm going to put a really, really warm color on the nose right now, just to kind of get things moving a little bit. So similar here, up by the brow. Another question I get asked a lot is about blending. And I think most people kind of understand that the wrong way, where they think you're just throwing two wildly different values next to each other and they're just kind of smooshing them around. But the reality is, most of the time when I'm blending, it's more of just killing an edge between two values that are close to each other. And if they're far enough apart, it kind of requires you to mix another value in between them and then just kind of lay it on top, which is probably going to happen at some point. I'll make sure to point that out when that happens. All right, so the next kind of area I'm going to move on to is the chin, sort of muzzle area. And even on women, there tends to be a little sort of greenish hue to it. Certainly a lot cooler, maybe a little bit bluer, which, if you overdo, can really look like a 5 o'clock shadow. So it's important to avoid that if you're painting somebody who does not want a 5 o'clock shadow.
You were talking about blending.
Yeah.
Is that also why the end of your strokes you like feather them out a little bit?
Maybe, yeah. I don't even notice that, but that's possible. Yeah. So you mean like kind of like throwing away?
One of your strokes, like
Sure. Yeah, and yeah, that's a great point. Like it's more like I want that edge to not be so solid, because that's going to cause the eye to understand it as like a real sharp turn in the form, which is just not there most of the time. There will be like some sharp edges, especially in the eyes, just because sharp edges are really great to kind of draw focus also. So, when I get to the eyes, I'm going to really, really sharpen them up, and the rest of the face may be a little bit more blurred like it is now, but those sharp eyes are really going to kind of draw you in. Can you see it okay, guys? The painting? Just because glare is always such an issue especially with oil painting, where your strokes are kind of going all in different directions.
I know you said you're not slaving to your reference, but
yeah. Oh, I'm not even looking at it anymore.
Yeah, but maybe show it so I would like.
Oh, sure.
See what you were going off of it visually. That's all right.
Yeah, totally. Another thing, just a great sort of a general process thing for painting, especially portraits. Generally you want to get it look like somebody and then the person that you're painting later. And I think I kind of have started stopping at getting it to look like somebody, and I'm not worrying so much about getting it to look exactly like the person.
Like even when you took that shot, I mean, you weren't worried about the lighting at all.
You mean like orchestrating it? So if I was, yeah.
Snapped it,
Well, yeah. If I was really worried about, getting a certain look, I would kind of, make sure everything is right. But sometimes the things you don't expect are the best things, right? So if you drop a chip on the roulette table, you leave it there just in case. It's sort of the same thing. If something happens by accident, see what happens.
What does the lighting look like in your studio, like when you're painting, like to avoid glare or anything?
So I kind of have a similar, it's generally similar to this, where all the light is from the top, and it's mostly kind of raking over. So it's pretty like the light would be like right here, just kind of raking straight down over the painting. And I know people who have really elaborate setups where like they have different lights kind of coming at different angles just to kind of eliminate any glare possible. But for me, it's just so much of a hassle to kind of, make sure everything is right. And it's just so easy to have that one lamp on top. And the lamp I actually use, it's just a broken desk lamp that I taped to my easel.
Like what temperature is it?
It's really warm actually, which is a problem. And I kind of have to, do things to adjust that. Yeah. That's super, like ridiculously warm. I think like maybe that's wrong. I feel like 5,000 is pretty like right in the middle, and you can get lights that are sort of really calibrated to that. I actually have really nice lights that I could potentially set up for painting, but I use them mostly as photography lights, just for taking pictures of paintings later.
Do you record everything you make?
Pretty much, yeah. I just got to the habit, and now it's like, it's bad because now I have this problem where if I don't paint it, or if I don't record it, I feel like, oh, I'm gonna miss out on like a really good video, So it's sort of, I'm a slave to it now almost.
Yeah, do you find that it works in the other way, like you paint less if you're not gonna be recording it?
Do I paint less if I'm not gonna be recording it?
Yeah, like if you're not gonna record it, then you're not gonna paint.
It's for me, I have the process set up so easily now where it's not like a big setup that I have to go through. So it doesn't stop me from painting or anything like that. I should say though, if I do like a big painting, like a huge painting, I'm not going to record it just because of how huge that file size would be. Like, once it gets to like 5 hours, then it's, dangerously unmanageable with how much storage I have.
You record it all in real time?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, which is so funny because I have literally like terabytes and terabytes of paintings, full paintings.
How do you choose which parts to share?
So most of the time I just speed the whole thing up. So it'll be the full process, just like a lot faster. And yeah, I rarely will cut anything out unless I, specifically recorded only little sections of the painting.
And then we have a question for Zoom. Who are your biggest influences? Which painters do you feel like you've learned the most from observing?
Oh man, rough. Yeah, there's just too many to like even start answering that question. I'd say, Klimt, as far as dead painters go, Klimt was like a huge inspiration for me when I was younger. My mother was really obsessed with his work, and I was always exposed to it, and I really love it. I love the sort of, elements of realism in there, but also a lot of design to it as well. And some like sort of maybe what we could call like, not necessarily surrealistic, but sort of approaching that same style. And then Sargent in terms of like technical ability, sort of like the pinnacle of alla prima painting. Yeah, I don't know, tons. All right. Now, like I was saying before, you're also considering, what's behind the skin, not only the light that's falling on top of it. And as we get to the cheeks, well, they tend to be pretty flush. So a lot warmer. Now, here's a great example where this value changes, I like it between the cheek receding here and the actual front-facing cheek. But it's a little too stark, right? It makes us think that there's like a sharp angle there. So there's two ways to manage that, where you could either literally just take your brush, maybe like, almost like a dry brush, and kind of just kill the edge. And, that's like what I think most people would think of as blending. And it works out pretty well. Sometimes you'll get weird translucency things, or you'll have two colors next to each other that are just not happy to work with each other. But in this case, this whole palette, they kind of, they're all friends and they all don't mind touching each other. So it's not a big deal here. Or, I'll do it with the other cheek a different way, where I'll just kind of mix a slightly darker value and just kind of, go in the middle of it. And you can see like, it's so much nicer if you mix a different value rather than kind of spending all this time, blending into the other color. They're both kind of blending because you're still putting paint on top of other paint that's already there. But one is just a more sort of accurate, graceful way of doing it. We get some cues here.
And we have somebody on Zoom asking if you're planning on doing more of these because he's enjoying this session.
No, just kidding. Yes. Anytime. How long have we been, by the way?
We're at 2:45 right now, so you have 45 minutes.
Halfway. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Another thing, by the way, that I just realized, you can get so sucked into like being close to your picture, and it really blinds you to the whole thing, or the thing as a whole. So it's really good to kind of step back and look at it from far. In fact, it's maybe even more better to paint from that distance as well. I got so used to painting these really small, detailed paintings that my nature is to just get really close in there. Now the sides of the nose are also kind of facing away, generally from the light. It's sort of like it's mimicking the cheek a lot, right? They're kind of, you can imagine that's a parallel plane right there between the cheek and the side of the nose. So it's also going to be a much cooler color and darker value than the surrounding. See, it really does quite a bit for shaping out that nose. Maybe could even go darker. Just gotta remind myself. Yeah. Now, another thing is like people worry a lot about ruining the painting in a particular way. And I get a lot of things where like, just because my whole painting process is out there for people to see, there's this sort of general feeling that like, oh, you never make a mistake just because they see it go from the beginning to the end. But the reality is, even now I've made so many like little mistakes, but, I'm taking notes as I go along. And I don't need to fix them right away, as long as I kind of have them in my brain as I'm painting. So the nose, for instance, I feel like is way far to the right of the face, but I'm aware of it. I'm handling it as I go along. And when I get to a point where I'm putting in lighter values, I can correct that pretty easy. Like, just move it over slightly this way. So there's always a chance to kind of fix things. A little lighter value on the eyelid. This is actually quite a bit darker here, a spot that I missed, kind of. I'm just going to remix that Ultramarine Blue and Cad Red mixture. A little bit warmer. All right, now I'm going to do sort of the under eyelid. You know what, actually I'm going to kind of mix into a different color here. Now this color on my palette right here, it's like a really cool dark red. Cool as in temperature-wise. And it's the pigment is PB234, I think, 245 maybe. I'll have to look at that. I'll make sure to make, actually, you know what, I can see it right here. 264, PR264. And you know, it's kind of a rare pigment to find in paint companies. And it's called a bunch of different things, like Pyrrole Rubine sometimes. I think that's like what the PR stands for, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a really nice kind of translucent red that gives you a little bit more of well, like I said, like a cooler red rather than having this very warm, opaque cadmium red. Alizarin Crimson is another color that substitutes very easily for it. But I'm going to use it to kind of just mix a really, really dark red when I need it. And I'm just going to go black and that red. And I'm going to use that color right there. Maybe the darkest value that I have to kind of really accentuate the eyes. And a lot of people, there's this big stigma about using black. And people say, oh, it's so bad to use black. You can't use black. But the reality is that it's a pigment just like any other color. And you know, the fact that no black exists in reality is very different from using black paint, which itself is not completely black. So using black is just like, you know, same thing as using a really dark brown or a really dark purple. And it's a great mixing color too. If you need to like kill the vibrancy of a particular color, like a color is just too powerful, mixing it with a little black works a lot of the times. And the real, you know, best way to interpret the sort of don't use black thing would be if you need a darker version of another color, simply mixing it with black is probably not going to get you the right answer. All right, so I was going to do the under eye. So for that, I'm going to use that darker red, a little bit of blue, and get kind of a purpley color just to really accentuate those big bags under my eyes. I think maybe the darkest area would actually be right here as the fold gets really pronounced. As you can see, I'm kind of like taking a lot more time here, just as I'm exiting the sort of gestural period of this painting. Boy, it's nice to have like a, I almost never paint on a table, and you can be so steady here. So now would be a point where like I take stock in the symmetry of the eyes, and I would, this is sort of my last chance to change things in a big way. So I could, be really, really specific if I wanted to, and do some measurements and see how accurate I was. It's pretty good. Maybe if this was like a really important piece that I was spending a lot of time on, I would get in there and really sort of change things a lot. But for right now, I think it works.
I think it's crazy that you're not using your reference anything.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I painted this so many times, like just a face in general, that even if I was looking at the reference, I feel like I would be putting things in that reference just from my experience, you know what I mean? Like, what's that great quote? What you see, what you find changes what you see, but what you see also changes what you find. So like the more experience you get, sometimes you're, adding things or you're specifically looking for things just because you know what to look for. That can be a big danger too with especially younger artists who, learn to paint it a very particular way, or like learn to draw a very particular way, and then everything that they draw ends up starting from that point, when much of the time it might not actually be there. I always think it's interesting, like when we paint, or when we first start like little kids and we're like drawing, like stick figures is like the main thing that we do, like such a bizarre way to interpret a person, or like painting an eye. We have like this football shape that is almost never actually there, just because it's like we understand kind of what the eye should look like, right? But we're kind of only thinking about it in terms of what's there devoid of like a light source. And it's so much better if you can kind of, I was saying this earlier, I was talking to somebody earlier, where if you could pretend like you just landed from outer space and you're an alien seeing humans for the first time, and rather than, at that point, you're not able to kind of describe it as an eye to somebody, right? You have to describe it based on all the parts that make up that eye. And that's, I think, such a better way to kind of approach drawing and painting in general.
A couple questions from Zoom.
Yeah.
Do you choose the lighting, or do you use the lighting from your reference?
Like right now, honestly, I'm probably altering it to some degree, but it's generally like light coming from above.
And did you find oil painting difficult or intimidating when you were a beginner?
Maybe. When I was like really, really, really young, so like, let's say middle school period, I did acrylic paintings, like embarrassing, Bob Ross landscape stuff, but like really bad. And when I switched to oil, and the switch to oil too, which I didn't do until like way, 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 way later in life, I did purposely because I thought there was like some sort of prestige to it. Like I thought, oh, oil painting, that's like, the pinnacle of whatever of art. That's the most important art is made with oil paints. It was just like this sort of made up quality that I had in my mind. So maybe there was some, as I was doing it, I felt like I was doing something important kind of deal. But technique-wise, I just did it all by myself, so I was never worried about impressing anybody. And, the first like maybe 2 years of my painting, I didn't show anybody, and it was just completely my secret. So intimidation was not really something that factored into it a lot. All right, so I'm going to do another correction area here in the nose, which was just, a very gestural sort of basic shape that I put in there, just to kind of inform me of where it might be when I actually get serious about it. So I'm going to get serious now. And as I'm painting, I'm going to sort of judge more based on stuff that's already there, or judge sort of against stuff that's already there. So for instance, when I'm painting this nose here and I'm thinking about how wide it should be, I'm really relating it to where it falls in line with the eyes above it. So I kind of want to bring it to maybe just about where the iris is there. All right, now this area of the muzzle is pretty interesting here. So there's usually like a fold right in the cheek here, where that cheek sort of meets the sort of upper lip area. And another, dangerous thing, you might understand that that's there, so you'd be tempted to put a really, really defined line here, a very big sort of clef that shows us it's there, but subtlety is really the key here, because you don't want this, you'll end up making it look kind of like a Halloween mask if the changes in value are too strong there. And then this is going to be quite bright here. Again, maybe a little bit cooler because it's part of that upper lip area, which tends to be a little bit cooler. And as it falls away, gets a little bit darker in value.
Do you have any other mediums you like, or do you like oils the best?
Definitely like oils the best. Tried a couple other things. Yeah, nothing's really kind of grabbed me as much yet. I do like painting with gouache, which is sort of like an acrylic kind of paint. Very fast drying, which is like completely different from oil, and that's kind of why I like it, is takes me out of my comfort zone a little bit and forces me to make really, really decisive decisions when it comes to color. But yeah, oil has been my thing. I don't know, just fell in love with it and haven't looked back too much.
What are your thoughts on blow dry medium?
Blow drying?
Blow dry medium, like a Jordan?
Oh, slow dry medium. Yeah, I don't really use them. Hi, by the way. Sorry, I'm behind this thing. Yeah, I've never really used them. I don't think I've ever used them, to be honest. I've never felt the need, really. They dry so slowly as it is that I can't imagine ever really needing it, unless your paint. I guess there's different paints that dry at different times. But yeah, I've never. Oh, for acrylic.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes more sense. That makes more sense. That I also have no experience with, really, to be honest. I have seen some painters try to emulate sort of a more like alla prima style with like kind of a one-go style with acrylics by using those slow dry mediums, but I don't really have personal experience with it. So I know it's possible, and I know that it is done. I don't know. I always find the attractive part of acrylics is that they do dry so fast. You can kind of get to those other layers really, really quickly. Whereas this, if I was doing another layer, I would have to wait a day for sure. All right, I'm gonna kind of jump. I feel like I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna jump to the eyes real quick, because I want to make sure to get that done. And one of the big, huge issues, just like I was saying about, trying to pretend to be an alien and landing from space and having never seen an eye before, we're so accustomed to recognizing, processing the eyes as white that if I were, a child and an experienced artist, I may be tempted to just put white there for the eyes. But the reality is it's so much more varied than that. And I'm actually mixing such a cool, cold color. Oh man, I can get really close, can't we? Is that super out of focus? So it's almost just purple, like really, really dark purple, which is just ultramarine blue. I'm actually using a little bit of that Peril Rubine color, and then a little bit of white to kind of gray it out. And that's going to be the darkest value in that sclera of my eye. And because the brow is kind of overhanging, it's casting a shadow over the eye. So that's where the shadow is going to go. And as the brow kind of lifts off like that, that's where the value will start to change a little bit. Now this pupil is obviously huge here. I didn't even mention that, but I kind of corrected it by, moving it over. So now is the time where I'm going to erase what I had before. And it looks very dark right now, but just remember, this is the darkest value that's going to be in that eye. A lot of painting, I feel like, is doing things in preparation for like the next step.
I couldn't see when you were using that red just now. Were you just pulling back that edge that you lost on the?
Oh yeah. Just kind of defining that sort of upper lid area. Let me just kind of see if I can find any interesting things. Please. Yeah, so just kind of see a little bit, a very bluish, bluer than the darker value. Right up here. Again, pretty easy to correct if you like overstep your bounds a little bit. Oopsies. Sometimes with eyes, I like to take a really, really blue, pretty dark blue value and just kind of trace the outline of the iris. I find it just helps with that edge a lot because you don't want that to be a very, very, very sharp edge all the time. All right, I'm gonna put in the nostrils. Again, just kind of general shapes, and then as I add values around it, I'll tighten them up. And this is probably the darkest color that I'll get to, which is just that black mixed with that dark red. And as I have that color, I'm going to go ahead and come down to the mouth and start to show that there's a slight opening at the edges of the mouth. And then the lips kind of parted a little bit towards the center. And I'm going to make kind of a big move. Just doing the bottom edge of the lip, or the bottom lip rather. Just make it really, really pink. Ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue is like, it's not the most vibrant, nice blue on its own, but it's just a great mixing color. It's really great for portraits where you don't need this sort of like very, very stark blue. Maybe not the greatest blue for like a landscape palette or something like that, but works really well with portraits, I find. Just gotta make sure I don't have too pink so it doesn't look like lipstick. But these are always my favorite parts here, where you can make kind of a big move, a big giant stroke, and it kind of really adds a lot of shape to the portrait. And then even Oopsies. Even more and more cool as you recede towards the corners of the mouth. When I do that, by the way, I don't know, I just kind of, I don't know if that's a known thing, but I just swish it around in mineral spirits just to get the remaining paint off of the brush, and then wipe it with a paper towel. Just kind of tease the corners of the mouth here. And the lip, the upper lip, is going to turn out a little bit, so I'm going to start gesturing that in a little bit. Too bright.
So you took a photo at the beginning of yourself,
Yeah.
and then you haven't really used it since, or you kind of just...
I kind of honestly just used that to get the structure, initial structure down.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I may return to it just to kind of get some ideas.
We have a question, someone's
Yeah.
asking, we're just kind of inventing this as you go along, or...
Yeah, oh yeah, mostly.
Okay. We have about 15 minutes left.
Oh, God. This is where we decide that our plan from the beginning was to make a very, very rough face. That's not going to be finished. All right, I'll start making bigger steps here. So one of my favorite highlight colors for a face, for like a Caucasian skin color, is just like cadmium red with white. It just works so well. With white. I should say cadmium red light, I guess. Actually, I'm going to step back a little bit just so it's not so drastic. But I love adding these highlights here because this is a great quick way to kind of get a lot of expression in the face where, you know, a lot of these folds and stuff are happening. We've put down a sort of a layer of where all those creases are going to be, the dark colors of those creases, and we can just add these highlights in on top, and it really gives us sort of the illusion of the folds of those creases actually being there. Like we spent a lot of time kind of forming them out, when in actuality we kind of just plopped them in. Can add a little bit of white, or sorry, yellow as we get to the brightest parts, where the light from above is first interacting with the skin. And the same thing down here on the top of the cheek is the other sort of shelf that's most exposed to the light. Also, you know, kind of important to note that I think is just, I take for granted a little bit because it's become part of my process, but, you know, we are kind of letting things sit a little bit, and they won't, you know, necessarily dry, but, you know, a little bit will leave from it, and it'll get a little bit more tacky, I guess. And it's just so much easier to kind of pull these lighter highlights over these colors in the cheek that we put a long time ago. So if we did those right next to each other, right after each other, it might not have been as successful. So kind of planning your painting out in that way is, I don't know, something is a good thing maybe sometimes. And I'm going to kind of get a little bit warmer even, so a little bit more red to kind of bring out this I guess like the bulb of the nose, we would say. And then also mark the top of the nostril. Probably gets a little bit brighter here. Right where that nose kind of meets the in between the eyes. And we want to make sure that that overhang of the brow is dark enough. Please. How much more time?
9 minutes.
This should be the Olympic. They should do this in the Olympics. It'd be so cool. I feel like they had that actually. Now that I think about it, I remember learning about that in school. Like I think back in ancient Greece, the arts were a part of the Olympics as well. All right. Upper lip here. There's that space right above the lip. Or kind of ducks underneath. It's a pretty good bright highlight there. Let's just fill some of this in. Are we still on Zoom or no?
We are.
Oh, they can hear us?
Yep.
Oh man, they heard my plan. All right, I just have to get to my favorite part, which is the highlights, like the very, very tippy top highlights. And you know, there's a big kind of, another kind of stigma in art is like, you know, never use a pure color, like never, or at least in terms of white, never use pure white for your highlights. Just because the likelihood of that actually being the true color is very low. But, you know, again, that one of my favorite sayings, you know, your job is not to make the most accurate painting, but the most beautiful one, or the best looking one, the most effective one. And sometimes that situation asks you for this really, really tight, bright white highlight. But first, I'm going to do, just accentuate these even more out here. So, you know, I could have left that, and it could have been, you know, a totally fine sort of value range to just leave that highlight as it was, but, you know, we could get brighter and brighter and brighter and more luminous. And of course, there will be a point where we overdo it. But I think we're pretty far from that point still. That was pretty quick. Nice job by the camera dude, Andrew. Also, this little shelf here created by the bottom lid facing up. Speed mode. Nothing going on here, who knows? I always hate paintings, or I always hate faces that don't have ears. So we gotta put an ear in there. Quickest ears of all time. I really love too, here's a little kind of tip that I do sometimes, just taking pure cadmium red light and knocking it in there where the sort of translucency of the ear would be. It's just like a very quick kind of way to get the ear. That's for elves today. And then I'll just do some of those cool, really bright highlights.
You have a minute left.
All right, let's just say it's done. Not take any more time. Now, you could keep going forever and ever and ever and keep tightening it up to infinity. But sometimes, the cool part of that alla prima style is all these sort of dancing shapes around it and how free and undefined it is. Yeah, all right. Thank you, guys.